Maya jumped the low parapet and landed on wet gravel, the taste of rain on her tongue and a raw, physical fear pushing each step. Fear drove her forward. Fear for the locket at her throat. Fear for the paper folded beneath it. Fear that whatever she carried would drag her into a life she had been running from. Her breath came sharp and shallow. Footsteps pounded the stairwell behind her. Someone shouted a name she did not want to hear. Maya kept moving. She did not pause to think. The roof around her sloped toward graffiti, streaked vents and a chain link fence that could not hide the city lights. She slid along a low wall, palm scraping paint, and checked the locket with a fast, practiced motion. The silver chain still closed, the tiny cross warm against her skin. The moment she felt the cool metal, she remembered the morning that had sent her running, her hands fumbling with a doorknob while voices rose inside the house. But she did not stop to picture their faces. The immediate problem was simple and urgent. Get off the roof before they reached her. A shadow detached from a darker corner and stepped forward until his silhouette had filled the only clear path. He wore a tailored overcoat that held the light in smooth planes. Maya halted, knees tight and hands clamped on the locket, suspicion sharpening her muscles. She had run into this exact kind of presence before, someone who belonged to the other side of the door she had left. But she had not expected to meet that presence on top of a building with a ledge beneath her feet. "Stay where you are," the man said, and his voice had the low, controlled pitch of someone used to giving orders. He did not sound like the men chasing her. His words were measured. Maya watched him for a long heartbeat. The dust on his collar, the way his hand hovered near a pocket, how his eyes measured her, not with the blunt hunger of the pursuers, but with a distant, slow focus. Maya pushed her hair behind her ear. She kept the locket tight against her chest and answered in a voice that did not want to betray panic, "I done want trouble." The phrase left her mouth like an offering. It was small and practical. Fear made her hands fidget. She set her weight, ready to run again. He did not move. He tilted his head the way someone who listens to the wrong song and knows the right beat. "You re not from here," he said. "Who are you running from?" His tone held a question that was both threat and curiosity. Maya's suspicion shifted into a different focus. She calculated. "Keep the truth pinned down, say as little as possible. No one I know," she answered. That was a lie designed to protect the real secret folded under the locket and the paper inside it. Her throat tightened. The sound of boots on metal drew closer from the stairwell. The stairwell light swallowed a shape. Marco appearing with two men behind him, hands on the rail, faces flat and expecting orders. Marco's eyes locked to hers, and she could read the immediate assumption in his posture. This woman should be seized, questioned, removed. He called up the chain of command into his earpiece as if confirming a routine. Marco stepped forward. "She's the one, Luca," he said, before anyone else could speak. At his name, the other man, Luca, shifted. Luca moved with a quiet authority. His coat closed like a plane cutting through the air. He watched the dropped locket tumble from Maya's fingers during the scuffle and land in the lump of gravel between them. Marco barked in order, "Grab her." Now, Maya bent at the waist reflexively and lunged for the locket. It slipped past her hand and into Lucas' reach. He caught it with the lightest motion, thumb brushing the worn silver, and for a second the world tightened around that tiny object. The touch changed the angle of everything. Marco's impatience sharpened. "Give it here," Marco demanded. Luca did not hand the locket over. He opened it with a thumb that did not tremble. Inside, a folded photograph peeked out along with a pressed scrap of paper. Luca read for the span of a breath, and his face did not betray the information the image supplied. Instead, his eyes narrowed the way a man narrows them when he sees a complication that must be measured before action. A sudden surge of adrenaline pushed Maya toward the parapet. She had a plan that beat in her chest. Jump, run across the adjacent roof, find the alley with the low fence, disappear into the night. She took a step, boots clattering on gravel. Her foot slipped on a wet patch. The world condensed to the scrape of rubber, the locket between Luca's fingers, and the feeling of leaning over an edge she had not meant to meet. Her breath vanished. She reached for the wall and found air. For an instant she dangled with the city below and the night open and a hand closing on nothing. Then Luca moved. He launched across the rooftop with a single, controlled span and seized her forearm, hauling her back onto gravel with a force that drove the wind from her lungs. They hit the ground together. Maya stared at him, chest heaving, the locket warm against his palm. Marco swore. "You idiot," Marco snapped. "You were supposed to bring her to the house." Luca's reply was quiet but absolute. "Not tonight." He pushed himself upright and kept his hand on the locket as if the metal were an anchor. "Not now," Marco barked at him, his voice rising. "Orders, Luca." "They re-asking. Orders can wait." Luca interrupted, his jaw flexed. He kept his eyes on Maya in a way that read more than immediate suspicion. His posture shifted from boss to guard in the space of a breath. He stepped between Marco and the stairwell and his body became a barrier. Maya's sphere scrambled into new, conflicting motions. She had come to survive alone. She had not expected to be defended by the man whose world had built the house. She had fled. Suspicion warred with a sharp, reluctant relief that his hand had been the one to save her from falling. She did not know what he had seen in the photograph. She did not know why he chose to break the chain of command. Marco's phone buzzed. He tapped the screen, eyes flicking to a map and to icons that meant outside pressure. His voice tightened. "A sweep is moving toward the district. They're picking up chatter about a witness. If she talks, we lose." He did not finish. Luca turned his head and closed his hand around the locket with a deliberate motion and put it into his coat pocket. They moved away from the parapet in a tight, urgent line. Luca kept the distance between Maya and the stairwell as if a physical buffer could change how others interpreted what had happened. He led them down a back corridor where a metal door slammed behind them, masking the city noise. Marco muttered into his earpiece, "We move her fast. We don't let anyone see where she comes from." Inside the stairwell, Marco's tone changed into the clipped register he used with men who needed orders to move. "Check the alley, clear the route. I want eyes on every corner." Luca did not answer. He kept a hand against the pocket that held the locket. Maya felt each beat of his jacket against her as they descended, a measured, steady presence that kept a space around her. In the car under the streetlight, the hush tightened into a room of its own. The interior smelled of leather and the small, bitter, sweet coffee he preferred, smoky cedar and black. Marco sat in the driver's seat, fingers close to the radio. Luca folded the locket between thumb and forefinger while Maya folded her hands in her lap and watched the street flash by. Marco's voice came through the silence. "Who are you?" "Tell us." Maya pressed her lips together. She felt Luca's gaze on her, not inspecting but reading, and that made her conserve her answers. "I told you already," she said. "No one I know." Her voice was small, but she kept it even. Marco's impatience snapped. "Maya, give me your name." He called her by the name printed on a work card he had found earlier. "Maya Alvarez, where do you come from?" She uttered a straight sentence. "I worked at the house until last night." That admission was concrete and dangerous. It gave them something tangible to pull at. Marco's mouth tightened. "Luca quietly, which house?" Maya named the address. She did not speak about the things she had seen inside, only that the house had been a place of work, and then a place she had fled. Saying the address made the danger visible. It changed suspicion into something operational. Marco's hand tightened on the wheel. A call cut across the car's slow hum. Marco answered with a clipped, urgent exchange and then passed the phone to Luca. Luca listened. His face did not fracture. He spoke once into the line. "Hold off. I have her. We'll move tonight." He stopped the conversation there and hung up with a motion that promised consequences. Maya felt the ground shift. The man who had saved her was not a stranger. He was someone with the power to make a choice, and, for reasons she did not yet understand, he chose to protect her. Relief tried to surface inside her chest. Hesitant and wary, she kept watching his hands. They arrived at a car that smelled like old cigarette ash and cleaner. Luca opened his coat and, without hesitation, offered the locket back to Maya. She stared at his hand for a long second and then took it. Her fingers brushed his. The contact was brief, but it unspooled a thread inside her, an uneasy sense that she had been seen by someone who could read meaning in small details. Marco paced once outside the vehicle and then leaned in. "You understand risk, Maya," he said. "If word gets out that you were seen at the house, it gets messy." The bluntness in his voice translated into a demand. "Tell us everything." Maya met his eyes. She tested the weight of what telling would do. She had in her pocket a folded paper with a name and a street, and a note that could shift blame. If she spoke that name aloud, she would hand them a key. If she kept it, she might be bargaining with her life. She made a choice born of instinct, not bravado. "I will not tell you names until I know I'm safe." Her mouth set. The sentence was both plea and defiance. Marco struck his palm against his thigh in frustration. "Luca, we don't have time for stalling. We need to know who's involved." He looked to Luca as if Luca's decision could be overturned by a clearer order. Luca's voice, low and calm, stopped Marco. "We move her to a safe location first. Then we ask." He did not explain himself. Marco protested with 3 short sentences that sounded like someone trying to force a decision. "You promised you'd hand her over. We can risk leaks. We need answers tonight." Luca answered with 3 short lines of his own, rapid enough to close the argument. "Not now. She falls, we lose control. We secure her, then we extract information." The exchange ended without a shout. It ended with Luca's authority settling the room. Maya felt tension compress into her ribs. Fear curated into a different reaction, wariness about obligations she had not asked for. She tried to sit rigidly, to be small and unremarkable. Instead, her fingers found the locket, and she pressed the metal into her palm as if it offered ballast. The drive through side streets was a sequence of lights and blurred storefronts. A message came through on Marco's phone. There were more enforcers hunting the district, and a nearby police sweep had been reported by an anonymous tip. Marco read the lines and swore under his breath, "They know pieces." Someone talked. He tapped the screen and then looked at Maya. "Pieces of what you carry," he said bluntly. Maya's mind skipped. The scraps of paper in the locket were suddenly not only personal but dangerous. Her resolve shifted again. Suspicion became strategy. If pieces were already leaking, staying silent could kill her. Saying too much could kill others. She did a quick inventory in her head of what she knew. The house address, a name scribbled in haste, a ledger number. Each item had a weight. She did not speak. At the diner turned temporary safe house, they took a booth under a window dimmed by rain. The interior light was warm, amber and low. Maya sat across from Luca and Marco, her jacket damp, hair tangled. Luca did not sit. He watched the street for a stretch before he allowed himself to relax into the vinyl seat opposite her. He placed the locket between them, open so the photograph could be seen if he wanted someone else to read it. But he kept it angled away. Maya's exhaustion caught up with her. She let her head tilt and her eyes fall closed for a moment. Luca watched her sleep with a posture that was both guard and something more complicated. His fingers traced along the seam of his coat. Marco ate a coffee in 3 quick sips and kept glancing at the door, as if expecting trouble to run straight in. Around them, the diner hummed with small, ordinary noises. A spoon against a saucer, a late night waitress asking a routine question, the distant hiss of traffic. Those sounds could have belonged to any night, except for the 3 people in the booth, and the photograph folded on the table. Luca's mouth moved once. "She stays with me tonight," he said. Marco shot a glance sharp enough to cut Luca. "Tonight," Luca repeated. He did not raise his voice. He slid the locket into his inner pocket, not as a theft but as a claim. I will be the one who answers for her. His decision closed the argument. Marco gave a single short sound that could have been resignation or irritation, and he took his phone back out. Maya woke to the scrape of chairs and the feeling of someone watching. She opened her eyes to find Luca studying the photograph in his hand, as if memorizing edges. His expression had softened in the way that comes when someone decides what to protect. She could not name the emotion in a neat word. She only knew that she felt steadier for a moment and then, immediately, anxious again. Outside the window the rain brightened the streetlights, and a motorcycle's headlamp flashed by in a wash of cool white. The decision had concrete consequences. She would spend the night under Luca's protection. She would be moved. People would ask questions. Her choice now was not whether to run but how to respond to being kept. Marco's earpiece crackled once. He checked the screen, then looked up. They were closing in from the north side. He said, "We need a route." His words were another external push. Luca stood and pushed a few bills across the table, an offer to the waitress that sealed their temporary privacy. "We leave in 10 minutes, he said. Maya stood too, joints stiff from adrenaline and sleeplessness. She slipped the locket around her neck and felt its small weight settle over her heart. Luca reached for the door first and then, for an instant, hesitated. He did not look at her when he spoke. "Keep your coat up. Move with us. Don't speak unless I tell you to speak." His instructions were precise. They had the shape of someone issuing commands to preserve control. She obeyed. When they stepped into the rain, Marco checked their rear and then kicked a small metal grate, loose to quiet their footsteps, for a short stretch. Luca walked at her side with his coat collar up, and for all the things she did not understand about him, she felt him slow his pace to match hers. The city swallowed their small group as they headed toward the waiting car. A siren wailed distantly and faded. Marco's phone buzzed one last time. He answered and listened for only a second before he gave a short reply and then a harsher line into the earpiece. The night's immediate danger had shifted. It was no longer just about catching a woman who had run. It was about covering tracks and deciding how far the boss would let the ripples spread. They reached the car and climbed in. Luca started the engine with a steady hand. He put the locket back into his coat pocket, fingers pressing the metal for a fraction of a breath. Maya exhaled for the first time since jumping the parapet. The exhale was small but real. The car moved off down a side street. The rain smudged the city into streaks of amber and neon. Inside the vehicle, no one spoke for a long mile. Then Marco, "You understand the stakes now, Maya. You are not just a witness. You are a lever." His voice was blunt. Luca's eyes cut to him and then away. Maya swallowed. Her fear had shifted again into calculation. She could be leverage, yes, but she could also be bargaining power to get out. She folded her hands tight and met Luca's gaze. "I will answer, if I know I'm safe," she said. The sentence carried the weight of a choice. Luca's fingers tightened once on the steering wheel. "Tonight, you stay with me. Tomorrow we talk more." The words left no promise of softness, only a clear, guarded pathway. He kept his voice low and steady. They drove on. The city slid by in a parade of reflections. As the car turned a corner, Marco's phone lit up with a new message and he swore softly. He read the screen and then looked up with a tight face. "There's an anonymous tip that names a secondary location tied to the ledger," he said. "We have to check it at first light." Luca nodded. The decision to protect her had already set obligations into motion. Maya felt those obligations land on her shoulders like small weights. She had not asked for any of this. She had only tried to get away. The locket at her throat felt heavier now because it contained not just a photograph but the start of other people's plans. They drove through an opening in the rain toward the safe house Luca had chosen. The car slowed as it pulled into a narrow lane. Marco cut the engine. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Luca opened his door and said plainly, "Stay near me." Don't answer the door for anyone. He did not ask her if she understood. His instruction assumed compliance. Maya stepped out and felt the night sweat press at her jacket. She locked her fingers around the strap of her small crossbody bag. She let the locket rest against her chest. Marco climbed out and checked the perimeter with the efficiency of a man who had done this more nights than he cared to count. Luca watched both of them and then reached into his pocket, palming the locket once more before he folded his hand away. The final sound was a slow, decisive click as Luca closed the diner door behind them and walked toward the back entrance of the safe house. That click marked the end of the rooftop chase and the beginning of a new, guarded arrangement. Maya followed him into the rain, and the night swallowed their footprints. Inside the safe house, the fluorescent light buzzed low. Furniture smelled faintly of cleaning solution. Marco set down a flask of coffee between them, and then took a seat against the wall. Luca placed the locket on the table, closed it, and set a single hand on top as if he were staking a claim and a promise in the same motion. He did not explain his reasons. He did not have to. The decision had already been made. Maya sat with her hands folded and listened to the faint noise of the city through a cracked window. Her fear had transformed into a wary, watchful patience. She had survived the roof. She had landed in the custody of the man who could both end and protect her. For now, the immediate danger had been deflected. For now, she was not alone. A phone buzzed on the table. Marco checked it and put it face down. Luca closed his eyes for a beat, and then looked at Maya with a neutral, practical expression. "You will tell me what you know in the morning," he said. "Until then, you stay here." He folded his hands together and the night settled into the smaller, mechanical tasks of protection. Locks, rotes, names memorized on a slip of paper. Maya nodded. She did not say the name tucked into the paper. She slipped the locket under her blouse and let the weight sit against her skin. A distant knocking came at the front door, soft and uncertain, and Marco stood first. Luca's hand moved toward the table and stopped. He watched the door, then looked at Maya. "Stay here," he said. He rose and walked toward the door, steady and deliberate, leaving the locket and a night of fragile truce on the table. The knock repeated, firmer this time. Maya's last clear sensation, before Luca reached the door, was the metallic press of the locket against her ribs and the sound of his footsteps crossing the floor toward the threshold. The chapter closed on that concrete, situational beat. A knock at the door, a man stepping forward, and a woman who had chosen for now to trust the hand that had pulled her back from the edge. A pair of hands shoved her into the back seat before the car had cleared the alley. The door slammed, and the engine took her breath. Fear tightened her fingers around the thin silver chain. Fear pushed her jaw forward and kept her voice low. Fear, she realized in a hard, physical way, had driven her off that rooftop and across wet gravel an hour earlier. Rain hit the side window in hard, quick beats and Marco's voice crackled over a radio in the front. The immediate problem was visible. Someone wanted what she carried beneath the locket, and they had not given up the search. Luca nothing for a long second. He drove with one hand on the wheel, eyes on the road, his jacket collar catching the neon behind them. "Maya," he said at last, precise and flat. "Why did you jump?" The question landed like a stone. It demanded a short answer and offered no safety. She swallowed and pushed a single sentence out between wet breaths. "I couldn't leave it behind." The single sentence was true and small. It left most things unsaid. She had fallen from a rooftop earlier, a memory that still scraped in her mouth. The shock of wet gravel under her soles, the taste of cold on her tongue, the locket heavy against her collarbone. That memory had a body, a cut on the palm from a rusted pipe, the way her boot had snagged on the ledge, not fog or metaphor. Marco's voice came again from the front, clipped. "We found nothing but a shoe and some smeared prints. Could be a setup." Marco's tone narrowed the space. The plan was already moving around her. Luca's hand reached back and lifted a corner of her jacket just enough to see the locket. He did not touch it. Another question with the same level of pressure. Whose name is written on that paper? Maya froze. She had kept the paper folded and pressed it to her skin for an hour like a pulse. To reveal it would be to hand over leverage she had not yet earned. She met Luca's eyes in the rearview mirror. "I can tell you yet," she said. He answered by steering into a narrow side street, tires whispering through rainwater. Marco's radio clipped again, perimeter sweep clear south side. No sign of the other party. Marco's voice was practical. His presence at the wheel was a constant that kept the situation anchored. For Maya, his clipped sentences read as a protective grid she could not yet trust. Luca changed direction and the luxury car hummed down wet asphalt toward a thin pool of open light, a 24-hour diner that glowed behind a ribbon of steam. Inside the car, the air smelled faintly of cedar and burnt coffee. Luca spoke softly, each word deliberately measured. "You could have died up there." "Tell me why." Maya's fingers found the locket again. She pictured the rooftop. Her boot left a clear slash of grit on the parapet, the sound of her heartbeat loud enough to drown out the rain. She forced herself to answer in short statements. There was a man. He knew the name. "I couldn't let him take it." She did not say what the name linked to. She did not say who had given her the paper. They pulled into the diner's wet lot and Luca parked under a sodium lamp that made the chrome of his car look like a burnished coin. Marco got out with a practical, watchful gait and kept his hand on the radio. He opened Maya's door and helped her steady her footing on the slick pavement. She moved like someone who had practiced small escapes until her muscles learned them. Inside, the diner smelled of coffee and frying oil, and the noise level dropped into a thin, focused hum. Luca sat opposite her in a corner booth and watched the room like a man reading maps. He folded a napkin slowly and then unfolded it. His hands were large and careful. Conversation arrived in short, efficient bursts. Detective Chen's been on a car in the area, Marco low, leaning against the counter where he kept one eye on the street. He waved a badge at the door, but the lot was empty when we checked. Someone saw headlights circling. Could be another crew. Marco's eyes found Luca and then Maya, the way a hinge pivots to check both sides. Maya listened and counted syllables, a habit that kept panic manageable. She watched Luca's jaw move when he absorbed information. When she reached instinctually for her locket, Marco's shadow crossed their table before either of the two principals could speak. He did not take the locket. He only made sure her hand had not slid the paper away. "You held on to it tight." Marco then corrected himself. "You did the right thing by running." His voice had a bluntness shaped by loyalty. Luca leaned forward. "Open it," he said, and the command was not harsh. It was a direction with consequence. Maya's fingers trembled. She hesitated. The locket had a name inside, a name tied to a man Luca had not expected to see again. She remembered the rooftop, a figure in a dark coat moving too fast, an exchange of hands, the flash of a small folded paper. The memory was a sequence of specific images. A gold cigarette lighter dropped on wet gravel, a humming neon sign reading "open" reflected on a puddle, the scrape of a shoe. That night had given her concrete things she could point to. It had not given her answers. She opened the locket. Luca's face changed in a way that made her stomach drop. His eyes sharpened and his mouth tightened over a single breath. The paper had a name she had learned as a child, a name that matched a photograph Luca kept in a drawer nobody touched. He recognized the handwriting the way a man recognizes a small, private wound. "No," he said quietly and not to her. The word stirred more than fear. Doubt moved in, an immediate second emotion that tightened around her because the name connected to someone in Luca's past. She felt suspicion bloom. Who else knew? Who else had been involved? Luca's mouth flattened. "Show me everything inside," he told her. Marco stood by the booth with a hand on his jacket. His posture said he would not let anyone approach without consequence. A horn cut through the diner's thin glass, and a car idled under the rain, sprayed light. Maya looked up and the diner tightened like a muscle. Marco's eyes went to the window. Headlights, he said. One vehicle. Different plate. He moved to the door. Luca stayed with Maya, but his hand came to rest near his coat's inside pocket, where a signet ring caught the light. The room seemed to strip down to function. Who entered, what they wanted, and how quickly Luca could read the threat. A man in plain clothes walked in and paused under the doorway with the wetness of the street on his jacket. He wore no badge on the outside, but his voice carried the steady, official cadence of someone used to asking questions. Luca Moretti. He asked. Detective Chen. Marco bristled, but Luca answered by putting a cup of coffee between them like a shield. This isn't the time for an interrogation, Luca. But talk. What have you seen? The detective's eyes flicked to Maya and back to Luca. There was an incident on a rooftop. Chen, we have reports. Someone might have seen a man fall or jump. Witnesses gave conflicting statements. Luca's shoulders shifted. Did anyone see a woman run? He asked. Maya's throat worked. The detective ground a cigarette with his shoe outside the diner and then said, We found a shoe. We found traces. I want to know who else was up there. The question pressed into tangible territory. Police interest meant names, statements, and possibly exposure. It made Marco's jaw set. It made Luca weigh options in the slow way he weighed everything heavy, the way a man balances money and lives on a scale. When Luca leaned in, the diner booth swallowed their small conversation into a narrower shape. He directed questions in short phrases. Who gave it to you? Where were you going? Did anyone follow you after you left? Maya answered simply and mechanically. She would not volunteer more than she had to. Marco listened at the perimeter and interrupted twice with practical facts about the rooftop sweep. His interruptions moved the plot as much as any line. They forced decisions. We need to move her, Marco. Now the sentence altered the field. It drove action. Outside, headlights cut again, and someone threw a shadow across the diner's dark lot. Luca rose, standing over her with an expression that combined command and calculation. Wait here, he said to Maya, and then added to Marco, check the plate. Do not let anyone near us. Marco left. The room's air seemed to contract around that command. Maya felt a sliver of oddness, not safety exactly, but controlled containment. She went back to the locket while Luca was out of sight for a breath and caught the name again. It matched a name Luca had said once to someone else in a photograph he had kept. The name caused an immediate sound behind his eyes. Her next move was to test him. She slid the paper back into the fold and reached for a coffee cup to steady her hands. Marco returned with exact information, different state plates. This car's been circling the block twice in 10 minutes. Driver keeps switching seats. Marco's breath was a line of syllables that turned the room colder. Luca returned with a controlled pace and sat without asking permission. He fixed Maya with a look that was auditioning trust and measure. Who else knows? He asked. She shook her head. Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. Only me. Then she added a detail she had left out before. The man in the coat took a lighter when he left. He was trying to burn something. The new clue made a small pivot in the problem. It shifted suspicion from a casual theft to a deliberate attempt at erasure. Conversation became quicker, more clipped. Detective Chen straight questions and took notes that he did not show. Marco tapped out a string on a phone and sent it to a man who answered with a single word and a short command in return. The outside world reasserted itself in concrete signals, a radio frequency, a plate number, the smell of someone who had been standing under a puddle. Those were the tools they used to make decisions. Maya's chest stilled when the diner's glass door banged open and a man stepped in carrying a small firearm in plain sight. He did not hurry. He walked with a dry, practiced gait. He fixed his eyes on the booth where they sat. "Get up," the man said simply. His voice had the cruel flatness of someone who wanted a clean transaction. Marco moved first. He stood with compact speed and put himself between the man and the booth. Luca pushed forward and shoved Maya behind him with a motion that made her knees scrape the vinyl. Everything sped into action. Marco lunged and the attacker fired once. The bullet punched a hole through the diner central light and glass scattered onto the floor in a line of glitter. Luca threw himself between the attacker and Maya and used his body as a shield while reaching for the man's wrist. The sound of the gunshot was a hard, exact event. People dropped behind counters, plates skated across the floor. Marco wrestled the gun hand. His boots slid in oil. Maya's fingers dug into Luca's sleeve. Her breath hitched like it could break. "Get down," Luca ordered, and the command fractured fear into blunt compliance. The assailant attempted to break free and Marco swung a shoulder that hit his ribs. The gun slid across the floor and Marco kicked it under the counter. Luca's knee connected with the man's thigh and he pinched the jaw to lift the head for a control hold. Detective Chen dove in from the doorway and helped with a precise cuff at the wrist. The attacker cursed and then went quiet when the cuffs locked. The diner's fluorescent light showed the man's shoes, a soaked coat, and a face that did not match anything Maya had expected. He was not a known brother to anyone present. He was a hired hand, tasked and executed. After the immediate violence, the room was loud with practical movements. Marco checked for wounds and counted breaths out loud. Luca used a cloth to press a stinging bleed on his forearm where a stray scratch had opened. Maya watched him, noting the exact sequence. His hand steadied, his jaw relaxed almost imperceptibly, then set again. She noticed how his shoulders moved when he issued orders. Those small actions told her more than any evasive speech could. Detective Chen spoke with a clipped efficiency that took statements and catalogued them. "I'll need everyone's names and a formal statement later," he said. Luca answered with a single line. "Get my people out of here before the press arrives." "Don't let anyone follow them." Chen and Marco argued in a short exchange about jurisdiction and timing that ran in quick cuts. 3 back and 4th lines, each stopping at the other's edge. That argument forced Luca to make a choice about exposure. He chose containment. Maya sat with a napkin pressed to a cut on her knuckle and felt the adrenaline drain into a flat, tired silence. Her reaction changed again. Relief moved in like a new, dangerous thing. She had been saved, and that saving carried a cost. The shift from fear to a fragile, guarded relief arrived with physical signs. Her breathing slowed, her hands stopped shaking, her jaw unclenched. She looked at Luca. "Why did you do that?" she asked simply. He met her gaze without an answer at first. His voice came low. "Because you ran toward something I didn't want lost," he said. The line created a new knot. It revealed motive without spelling out the unspoken connection. Maya thought of the name again, and of the photograph Luca kept, a photo she had never seen but had heard mentioned in a story someone had told him offhand. The recognition she had prompted in him at the locket had altered his behavior. That was the unexpected reveal. Her secret was not only about her. It touched a place in Luca's past. Outside, police sirens sounded distant and then closer. Marco kept a watchful rod over the lot while Chen conducted interviews. Luca insisted Maya could not walk away that night. He put the locket back into her hand and said, "You stay with us. Not because I claimed you, but because leaving means they can take this from you on the street." The sentence was practical and contained a veiled ownership that unsettled her. She tightened her fingers around the chain and made a choice through action rather than speech. She slid the locket beneath her blouse and nodded. They went back outside under a rain that felt thinner than earlier, almost rinsing. Marco guided them to the car with a practical step and kept one hand on the shoulder of a man who had been cuffed on the floor. Luca closed the diner's door with a measured hand. He did not say it as a flourish. "Here it as a fact you stay in the car," he told Maya. Her response was a small, mechanical nod. She moved into the back seat and sat with both hands folded around the locket. Marco took the driver's seat and Luca slid into the passenger side, his coat collar up against rain. The engine purred and the city slid past in a slow smear of amber and blue. In the car the tone shifted again. Closer to understanding replaced the fragile relief and the old fear. Maya risked asking, "Who is he?" She meant the name on the paper. Luca's thumb rubbed the rim of his signet ring, a gesture Maya had noticed earlier. Someone I hoped I'd never see tied to my business again. The admission did not equal explanation. It did, however, raise stakes. Her secret tied into Luca's territory and his past choices. That connection changed how she thought of staying under his protection. The radio in Marco's ear crackled with instructions and a single line from headquarters. Luca listened for a beat and then said, "We go to a safe house. Tonight you do not leave the car except with me or Marco." Maya's mouth pressed thin. Her hands were steady now and the locket felt heavy and real against her sternum. She understood the consequence in an immediate, physical way. Movement had meaning and every decision altered risk. Marco started the engine and the car pulled out into a lane slick with reflected neon. Luca's face in the mirror was a map of controlled calculation and a small, almost imperceptible softness toward the woman who sat clutching a paper he recognized. Maya closed her eyes for a moment and let the motion take her. It steadied a hollow that the rooftop had yanked open. The last fact of the night settled into place with a quiet, decisive shape. Luca would not let her go, and for now, that refusal translated into protection. She felt anger flare and then fold into resolve. The emotional shifts had come fast. Fear to suspicion, suspicion to guarded relief to wary dependence. Each shift showed on her body, the way she drew her shoulders in, the set of her jaw, the lengthening of her breath. She tucked the locket deeper and watched Luca through the rearview mirror. When Marco turned down a dark street toward a parked car that would take them away from the diner's light, Luca reached back and placed a palm flat on the seat beside her, not touching her but making the space clear. "Stay close," he said. Maya looked at Marco and at Luca. She thought of the rooftop, the gravel, the fall, and the shoe left behind. She thought of the paper folded beneath the locket. Then she made a decision that felt like survival rather than surrender. The car moved away from the diner. The city narrowed behind them and the rain washed the rooftop shine off the glass. Luca checked the rearview mirror once, then twice, and set his jaw as if choosing the next move. The final sound of the chapter is concrete. Marco closed the car door, the engine hummed to a steady cadence, and Luca folded himself forward to study the map on a phone. The night's immediate danger had been met. Their new arrangement, an uneasy protection, had been declared in short, practical steps. The chapter ends with the car pulling into a quiet lane, lights blinking once, as Luca cut the engine and leaned back with a single, plain sentence. "You stay here tonight." Maya shoved the rusted rolling shutter with both hands while someone ran steps closer behind her. Fear tightened the back of her throat and pushed her legs faster. She scraped her knuckles on metal and felt the cold rain bleed through the sleeve of her leather jacket. The locket at her collar swung and bumped her sternum, a thin paper folded flat beneath its rim. She knew what that paper could do. Her first decision was flight. Her second decision, half a heartbeat later, was to keep running toward anything that looked like escape. She reached the dim concrete of the underground garage and dropped to the gravel, breath heavy, boots slipping. Maya kept pushing with her shoulder until the shutter rattled enough to let a thin vein of pale light fall along the floor. Fear remained the engine. She could not think beyond the immediate need to get out, to cross one boundary and be done, but a second feeling moved under it. Suspicion, a cautious calculation about who had followed her and why. She paused, ear trained to the hollow echoes above, and checked the bag at her hip where the crossbody strap rubbed her collarbone. A voice cut across the concrete 2 seconds later. Maya, the name hit the space like a thrown stone. She did not turn. Marco's boots were heavy, deliberate. His silhouette filled the light at the shutter mouth. Maya flattened herself against a pillar, fingers already finding the thin lock of metal tucked inside her jacket. "Marco, please," she breathed. The word was small and precise, her jaw clenched. She kept the locket tucked, fingers brushing the paper until she could feel the fold. Marco stepped onto the gravel, the flashlight on his belt making a pale coin of light. "You ran, Maya. You ran from the house. Now you come here." Her name with irritation, not curiosity. He moved like a man with orders, guarded, ready. Marco's voice had the hoarse edge of late nights and chain smoking. It cut across the space and left no room for explanations. Maya pushed herself up and backed toward a row of parked cars, boots scraping. Her breathing was a series of short pulls. "I couldn't stay, Marco. I had to get away." Her voice stayed low. She kept her eyes on the dark where another shadow might wait. The suspicion inside her shifted into anger then, a heat that burned off the cold for a moment. She had been chased off a rooftop. She had landed on gravel and run. She had spent 2 chapters running from a life she did not want. Now she would not be forced back without a fight. Marco stepped forward and planted his hand on the nearest hood as if to steady himself. "You dragged Luca into trouble, Maya. You don't just run with papers like that. Hands up, show me the chain." He spoke as if reading a list. His tone made space for no negotiation. At the sound of a car engine cutting through the tunnel, another light streaked across the concrete. Maya's body tightened. This was no longer a two-man question. Luca's headlights carved long amber bars through the damp air, and his silhouette filled the doorway of his luxury car when the engine died. He walked with the calm control of a man used to shifting the shape of a room by steps alone. Maya watched him approach. The moment her eyes met his, something changed. The suspicion that had hardened into anger thinned into a new, brittle calculation. Luca moved with a slow grace, hands at his sides, jaw set. He did not want to yell. He did not need to. "Luca, Marco, sharp." She ran. She left the roof. "She has something." Marco's fingers curled around the flashlight. Luca's gaze cut to Maya, fast and exact. He did not ask why at first. He simply observed the small details she could not hide. The scuff on her leather jacket, the way she tucked hair behind one ear, the faint scar on her left eyebrow that tightened when she lied. Maya felt that look travel across her. It read her like a ledger. For the first time since she fled the house, she felt less invisible than vulnerable. Fear shifted again, this time into a measured dread and a faint, odd hope that being seen might buy her something. Without a word, Luca reached for the car door, and in a motion that felt both command and rescue, pushed it open. Marco hesitated and then shoved Maya into the back seat. The padded leather swallowed her for a second. The car closed around them. Rain pattered against the glass. Maya braced her hands on her knees and felt the locket against her fingers, as if the paper whispered through the metal. Inside the car, the forced proximity altered everything. Maya had expected rougher handling, a reprimand, accusations. Instead, Luca sat behind the wheel with a controlled posture, eyes on the road as he drove out of the garage and into the wet streets. The city slicked past in streaks of neon and amber. Maya kept thinking of Chapter 1, the rooftop jump where she had landed on wet gravel, and of Chapter 2 when Hans had shoved her into the back seat before she could speak. Each memory was a concrete image. The scrape of gravel underfoot, the slam of a car door, the diner counter slick with rain residue. She did not reach for her locket right away. She listened to Marco in the front seat issuing clipped questions and to Luca's brief replies. In the low light, Luca's jaw was a line. Marco's impatience made his speech quick and sharp. "What did you snatch, Maya?" Marco demanded. "Who are you running from?" "No one you know, Marco," she said, and the words tasted like sand. Her fingers tightened on the locket until the metal pressed cold against her skin. Inside, the thin paper weighted like a small, dangerous thing. Luca's voice came from the front with a flatness that was not cruelty. "No one you know. or no one you can name. Maya Sansa stayed a whisper. I can tell you here. If they know the paper exists, they will come after whoever keeps it. Marco. He slid his boots harder against the floor. You ran into our half of town. That's not safe for you. It's not safe for us. The car slipped through an alley and into a quieter street. Maya watched the rain run down the window and turned the locket with a thumb as if testing its hinge. Fear moved into suspicion, then into a sharp, contained anger at her own helplessness. She had wanted autonomy. Now the only autonomy she had was the choice to keep the secret tucked, to choose whom to trust with it. They stopped at an old warehouse on the river, a place with a boarded door and a single bulb that hummed. Lucas architects of protection were always practical. They had a safe room with a table and a chair and a lock that clicked like a promise. Marco yanked the door open and led her inside. The bulb threw a yellow disc on the concrete. Luca closed the door and let the lid fall like a verdict. He her to sit. She did, hands in her lap. Luca picked up the locket while she watched. He did not pry at once. He held it between forefinger and thumb, the gold dull from being worn. Maya's fingers left a smudge where she had been touching it. Luca shifted the chain until the tiny fold of paper showed at the hinge. The heart of the room narrowed to that thin strip of white. Open it, Marco ordered. Maya's mouth went dry. Her body wanted to say no. Her body also wanted the ordeal to stop and for decisions to end somewhere concrete. She unfolded the paper with two trembling fingers. The words inside were short. A name, a date, a line noting an account number and a signature she recognized from a bureaucratic stamp. Details sharp enough to change what Luca thought he knew. She had expected blackmail. She had expected a demand. Instead, the paper named someone she had thought dead to their world and gave a ledger of transfers that did not match anyone's usual wiring. Luca read it with a flat face until his eyes flicked to Marco. Then his jaw tightened. This explains why Carlo's men moved last week, Marco, and the room tilted with new information. Maya watched them trade facts like a tally. Her fear folded into shame when Luca's gaze found her and asked a question without using words. Why had she carried this alone? She could not meet his eyes then. She had held the paper because she wanted to protect someone else. She had run because protecting that person meant exposing herself. The emotion inside her shifted, fear into resolve. She would not let words take the shape of the secret again without action. The next move arrived from outside, muffled shouts and the thud of heavy boots on metal stairs. Someone had crossed a line and brought the night to them. An external event snapped the room into motion. Luca moved first. He shoved a chair back and stepped toward the door while Marco readied the small flashlight and leather gloves. Maya was pushed toward the corner and told to stay low. She sat on the cold concrete, palms braced behind her, breath controlled by training she had learned in smaller, less dangerous ways. They went up through the warehouse into the rain, smeared night, and out onto the nearby rooftop, where the city opened into a jagged horizon of neon. The storm had built into a low, constant pressure. Raindrops cut slivers across the rooftop lights. Rival men spilled up the stairwell like smoke. The rooftop became a hard, physical arena, boots, gloved hands, and a handful of flashlights that made faces into plates of white. Pushed into the tight, wet edge of that roof, Maya felt the ground under her give a different kind of leverage. Luca moved through the melee and struck with a deliberate, efficient ferocity. Marco fought with loud, short motions, a visible muscle of aggression. Maya's role was less clear. She kept her feet and looked for a chance to act, to make some concrete impact beyond trembling. The attack was messy and immediate. Hands grabbed at Luca's coat. Someone shoved Marco against a low wall. A man lunged for Maya from her left. She pivoted, stepped, and shoved him with the corner of her shoulder into the parapet. Her action surprised herself. Her body responded before thought. The shove bought Luca an extra half-second to reach them. Then Maya lost her footing. Gravel slid under her boots near the parapet, and she felt the world tilt. Panic flooded her with a physical sharpness, lungs filling too fast, fingers scrabbling at thin air. For a second she saw the city upside down. Wet skyline, a strip of light she could not reach. Her hands closed on the edge, nails biting concrete. Luca's weight hit against her shoulder with a force that stopped the fall. He had moved through the crowd like a blade, grabbed her wrist and hauled with both hands. His grip was raw and exact. "Maya!" he said, and the name landed heavy between the teeth of the fight. He yanked, and her feet found purchase. In those seconds his mouth brushed against her ear as he hauled her back. She felt the wet of rain on his coat, the cheap sting of a cut that seamed his palm. The grip was fierce and final. Threats shouted. Men around them broke into movement, as if the gravity of the moment had changed their calculations. Luca shoved a man away with his shoulder and turned to face the attackers. He did not hesitate. His actions were orders rendered in muscle. Marco threw a hook that put distance between them and the last of the men. The rooftop emptied with a scatter of curses and hurried retreat. One attacker stayed too long and Luca ended the fight by closing a fist over his ear and pushing him off balance until he scrambled back to the stair. When the rooftop stilled, Maya sagged against the low wall, rain driving down the back of her neck. Her hands trembled and her chest heaved. Fear had found her in a new form. The sharp animal moment when you almost fell and someone stopped you. Then the fear shifted into something like fierce awareness. She had been living with secrets that drew violence closer. She had been saved by the man she had fled. Luca dropped to his knees in front of her without ceremony and checked the locket to make sure it was still there. His hands were steady as he worked the chain. "You kept it on you the whole night," he said, voice low. Maya nodded, unable to find a steadier response. "I couldn't trust anyone else to carry it. Why not me, Luca?" Her mouth tightened. She thought of the rooftop where Chapter 1 had ended and of the diner in Chapter 2 where she had almost spoken. She thought of the paper and the ledger inside. "Because I didn't know whether you would burn me for it," she said. Each word landed without flourish. He gave a slow, quiet laugh that did not reach his eyes. "You thought I'd have you killed for a scrap of paper. I thought you'd protect it because of what it brings to you, and that protection would be a kind of ownership." "I didn't want that," she said. Luca's jaw worked. Then he did something that shifted the tone entirely. He pressed his palm flat on the locket, and then over the paper and slid it across the concrete toward her. "You keep it. I'll keep you safe while it matters. But you act like it matters to me too. Understand that means limits." Marco snorted from the edge where he was checking the rooftop perimeter. "Limits the way we operate. Rules, Maya. You don't get to dictate where we go." His voice had the blunt edge of a man who prefers orders. Maya looked at Marco and then at Luca. The exchange was an argument without many words, but full of pressure. Her fear pivoted into decision. She would not be shoved from one authority to another without making a choice. "I will give you information in exchange for protection, Maya." The sentence was a bargain, but I will not sign over who I am. "I want to be a ledger entry." Luca's face held a hard expression as he considered her. The rain had washed lines down his cheeks and clung to his hair. "Marco," he said, then paused, careful in the phrasing. "We make terms. You guard the perimeter. I handle the risk of men coming for this. Maya, if you cross a line and put us at risk, I want to pretend there will be no consequence." Maya met his eyes. For the first time since the night began, she felt the rawness of a real negotiation rather than an imposition. The fear inside her softened into resolve again. Suspicion grew into a brittle trust measured by the terms before her. She could live with limits if the limits kept the person she had been protecting alive. They moved off the rooftop together toward the car. Marco stayed one step ahead, shoving bodies aside where necessary, eyes watching every stairwell. Luca walked beside Maya with a distance that felt deliberate. He did not hold her hand. He did not need to. Some things were decided in restraint. Back in the warehouse safe room, they sat opposite each other at the metal table. The paper lay between them like evidence and a wedge. The rain kept a steady percussion on the roof above. Outside, the city's noise had thinned. Inside, the three of them named facts and fought over interpretation. Carlos' men will tie that account to anyone who touched it. Marco, if they see you with it, Maya, they will assume you are working for someone else. They will come down hard. Maya picked up her coffee cup, cold now, and drank a measured swallow. The physical action steadied her. She put the cup down and met Marco's eyes. Then tell me how to move it without anyone tracing it back. The request was direct. Marco blinked, surprised by the clarity. You want instruction. Lucas' mouth was a thin line, instructions and a plan. Marco, you can run surveillance on the banks without leaving an obvious trace. We move accounts in small amounts through different channels. Maya, who do we protect? Who is the person behind this? Maya felt the weight of the question as one she could not dodge. The paper had been a shield all night. The act of naming would strip that away. She inhaled and spoke the name in a low voice. My sister, Elena. The name hit the air like a small, naked fact. Marco spat a short laugh that did not carry humor. Elena. Why would she be in Carlo's books? Maya kept her gaze steady. Because someone used her name to move money through a humanitarian front she ran before she disappeared. The transfers show as donations. They were rerouted. If Carlo traces them, he will think Elena is alive and working against him. He'll come after anyone who knows the routing. Silence took the safe room for a long breath. Marco's impatience shifted into a different tone, respect mixed with alarm. So you hid the paper to protect your sister. You did hide it to hurt Luca. I hid it because I had nowhere else to go, she said. I thought keeping it meant control. It only made me a target. Luca folded his hands and leaned forward enough for the light to catch the signet ring on his right hand. Then here's the plan, he said. We move what needs moving overnight. Marco and I set the cover. You help where you can, Maya. You stay visible where you must and invisible where you need to be. If anyone asks about you, Marco tells them you left town. And if Carlo doesn't, he stop. Maya. The question was small but forced. Lucas' reply was not a threat. It was a fact. Then we stop him. We cut his lines and make it not worth his time. Outside, distant sirens threaded the rain. An outside event, 2 squad cars idling down the street, pulled their attention for a beat. They waited, listening to the city breathe. Then they set about the details. They spent the next hours acting like 3 people with overlapping responsibilities. Marco organized who took which calls. Luca made the arrangements with a clipped efficiency that put men in specific positions. Maya typed routing instructions into a tablet with deliberate hands, the paper now scanned and transmitted on a secure line while she watched monitors. She did not let herself think about what would happen if anyone intercepted the signal. She focused on the tasks and on Marco's voice when he barked a correction. At dawn, the motions were done. Transfers were split into small pieces across accounts, notes left that obscured origin, and a cover story put in place that made the trail look mundane. They had turned the thin paper into a cluster of controlled actions. Maya felt exhausted and wired in a way she could not name. The fear that had ruled the night loosened its grip, replaced by a wariness that tasted like the metallic edge of rain on concrete. They drove in silence toward the small late-night diner where she had nearly torn her own life into pieces 2 nights before. The diner windows were dim with rain, and the chrome reflected the city in long lines. Inside, they sat in a booth washed in warm amber light. A single dropped glove lay on the table, a small thing that belonged to Maya. She had put it there to keep her hands warm while she waited. Maya slid the scanned copy of the paper across the table. That's what they wanted, she said. Her voice was steady. They wanted a ledger that tied my sister to funding routes. They wanted leverage. Luca watched her, and then touched the paper with a fingertip before setting it down. You did the right thing by bringing it here, instead of to someone we couldn't control. But you should have told us before you ran." His words were not a rebuke so much as a calibration. Marco leaned back and folded his arms. "You did cause trouble, Maya. But you also gave us a way in. We fixed the trouble." Maya listened to them pass the facts and felt the final emotion shift of the night take shape inside her. From fear to suspicion to resolve, and now towards something like acceptance mixed with guarded relief. She set the locket on the table and opened it for Luca to see that the original paper was gone. Only the scanned copy remained. She had destroyed the physical trail and given them a version that could be moved without the same risk. Luca looked at Maya and then at Marco. He reached over, put his hand flat on top of the scanned page, and then closed his fingers around hers when she let them meet. The gesture was a quiet claim and an equal acknowledgement. "We keep her safe," he said to both of them. "We keep you safe." For the price of cooperation, Maya squeezed his fingers, once a measured pressure. She did not smile. She did not sign any vows. She met his steadiness with the steadiness she had found in the night's choices. Marco muttered something about logistics and left first to handle clean-up. Luca stayed with Maya a little longer, watching the rain streak the window. "Why did you save me on the roof?" Maya finally. The question was very small compared to the night's events, but it carried the weight of a lifetime of assumptions. Luca's eyes searched her face. "Because you were about to fall," he said simply. "Because someone who runs into our world with a secret should not die in it without being given a chance to speak." Maya let that answer sit. It was not the answer she had expected, no grand confession, no confession of a different kind. It was a concrete reason that came with limits and obligations. When Marco returned, the final steps were brief. A plan for temporary relocation, a set of men who would watch the bank's activity, and a safe house prepared for Alina if they could confirm her location. They would move in 2 days. They would not promise forever. They promised only the immediate, the actionable. Maya closed her hand over the locket and pushed the scanned paper toward Luca. He tapped it once more, then folded his fingers over hers and slid his palm to cover both. It was a decision made with tools, names, and schedules, an agreement that involved movement rather than sentiment. Outside the diner, rain began to slow. The city cleaned itself in small rinses. Inside, the booth held 3 people whose night had rewritten the lines between them. A final external sound, the scrape of a chair as Marco stood, marked an ending action. Maya stood and put on her scuffed leather jacket. She fastened the thin silver chain around her throat again and felt the presence of the paper, now only as a memory in the locket's weight. Her voice, when she spoke, was low and exact. "I will act on the plan. I will help find Alina." Luca nodded, the movement small and decisive. "Then come at dawn. Be ready." Maya stepped away from the table, leaving the scanned paper between them. She moved toward the diner's dimmed window and watched the street blink under sodium lamps. The night's arc had closed into a set of choices that could be measured and executed. She did not feel triumphant. She felt practical, like someone who had repaired a machine that had been broken. Marco called her name at the door and she turned. "Done make me come looking for you again," he said with gruff concern. Maya answered as she had all night, short, controlled. "I won tea." She did not promise safety, only action. Out on the sidewalk, Luca caught up and fell into step at her side for 1 block. He did not take her hand. He adjusted the collar of his tailored coat and looked at the locket briefly. Then he said, simply, "You did the right thing tonight." She met his gaze. The rain had left small wet strands on her hair and darkened the fabric of her jacket. She thought of Alina, of the ledger, of the rooftop that had almost been an end. She thought of choices turned into plans. Back in the diner, Marco closed the ledger on the tablet and moved to leave a tip on the counter. Behind him, Luca folded his hands on the table where the scanned paper lay. The night's threats had been met with action. The immediate danger had been neutralized. The broader war might continue, but for now the small group had turned panic into a series of workable steps. Maya stepped into a cab, and the driver pulled away into the thinning rain. From the back window she watched Luca watch her go until buildings swallowed him. She clutched the locket with a thumb and felt the thin thread of paper gone from her possession, but not from consequence. The final beat of the night was concrete. She had committed to assisting, to handing over pieces of a plan, and to showing up at dawn. She had not surrendered who she was. She had, in the cold logical way that had governed the night, exchanged information for a line of protection. At the end of that exchange, a small, decisive action closed the chapter. Maya stopped the cab at the corner, paid the driver, and stepped out into the washed street. She reached into her pocket, pulled out a folded list with the safe house address Luca had given her, and tore the corner before dropping it into the nearest drain, an act to remove a trace. Then she walked away, boots hitting the pavement with a steady cadence and the rain drumming small, finite sounds on her hood. The night had not given her certainty, only a clear path forward tied to specific people and immediate plans. That was enough for now.